I love The Hobbit. It may be one of my favorite Lord of the Rings book, and I only say maybe because I go back and forth. It's hard to see any singular book in the trilogy as a standalone book, so it's kind of hard to compare with them. And the reason why I love The Hobbit is because it feels like such a different book. Reading it, especially if you compare it with the original trilogy, and especially with any other heroic journey, where the hero goes forth, it really feels completely different. It's like a reluctant hero's journey or a reverse hero's journey sort of deal, because you don't have these typical moments that you have to have if you're trying to tell this story. It doesn't have these climactic moments where the bare-chested hero strives forward to save the maiden, kill the tyrant, come back triumphant, and they get married and they have kids, and all the sequels then are just exalting in the glory of the hero. And the heroes are good people and the villains are villains, and the villains are basically, if you took the hero and made them evil, that's the story. And there's not usually a whole lot of deep philosophical arguments or anything like that. And again, nothing against these, but that's kind of fits the more cookie cutter sort of movie that we're expecting. And for movies made around the 2010s and everything like that, the superhero genres were really coming into their stride. They had come out, with Avengers, really, they were building up all these things. So they had found really at this point a formula for the superhero movie. They have this strict formula. If you want to tell a superhero movie, this is what it is. And because what are the Marvel movies really designed to do? They're designed to be the most accessible movies ever created. And they're building this great universe where everyone can be a part of. They're just telling the classic hero story over and over and over again. Big heroic moments, big evil villains, romance, happily ever afters, and the end from here. And so this is kind of where we're starting in. So what we have is when it was announced that Peter Jackson, the hero of all Lord of the Rings fans, the eternal hero, and every time we get an adaptation of another beloved franchise, our appreciation for Peter Jackson goes up continually to the point where I don't even know if anybody really blames him for what ended up happening with The Hobbit. Because, The Witcher, Rings of Power, Wheel of Time, we're just one dead series after another that's trying to soullessly become the next Game of Thrones and cha-ching, cha-ching, cha-ching from there. That's what they're trying to do. I was thrilled when it was going to come out because Peter Jackson, he's awesome. He knows how to do an adaptation. He knows how Tolkien works. He knows how to keep true to the source material, which seems to be a very, very rare thing to be able to do. And I was initially even more excited because I heard, I believe it was on Wikipedia, that we were getting 2 movies. And I was like, awesome. This is awesome. This is the way it should be. Because what you do, you have 2 movies that are 2 hours each, and that gives us enough time to cover everything. We can get a Hobbit adaptation with everything. We can get Bjorn, the trolls, the drudgery of the travel, the misty mountains, getting lost, and they get lost in Mirkwood, the drudgery. You can get the parts in The Hobbit that aren't the super exciting moments, but that's what makes The Hobbit so iconic. That's what makes it so good, is because it doesn't fit this cookie cutter conception that we have for what a story ought to be, what everything should be from here. And they could do it justice. And then they turned it into 3 movies, and each of them is 3 hours long. And so not only did we get all the details that I wanted, but we got more details than I ever thought, existed or could exist. Instead of an adaptation, we really seem to have come into the Hobbit cinematic universe, as you will, where everything within it, everything within the story and within the characters were less like Tolkien and less like Middle-earth and more adapted into much more of a tragic superhero, or kind of, it's just a different movie. We have the romance that's gonna be in there, or else we have, Thorin, he has to be a hero. We cannot possibly have a main character that doesn't fit. Even if it's a tragic hero, he has to be a hero from here. We have to build Bard up to be the unrequited hero, the nobody understands him or anything like that, despite the fact that that's not what the story is about. The story is not about cookie cutter heroes where they go and save the day. In fact, you could think of it as the dwarves going and mucking everything up. And that's what it's about. That's what it's about, the story. It's about, the right man in the wrong place, the right hobbit in the wrong place from here. What the focus of today is going to be is not necessarily on just how bad the movies are or how mediocre they are from there, but what we're going to be talking about is why at the current state of where movies are, all adaptations, I really can't see any other way. All modern adaptations of The Hobbit are doomed to fail and doomed to repeat the exact same thing that happened with with the Peter Jackson trilogy that came out in 2012 and so forth from there. There is a singular problem with the Hobbit story that makes it very difficult to adapt. Audiences in general have a rough idea of what a story should look like, and this changes depending on your time and place and what country you're in or anything. This is a vague and general statement, but hear me out. We're going to walk through it piece by piece so you kind of understand where I'm coming from. We understand when there is a kingdom or a place or a family or a character, something happens. Something usually bad, usually something, someone dies, say, for example, the king of Denmark, and then comes to his son Hamlet as a ghost and says, hey, this is what's going on with your uncle and your mom. It could be the hand of the king dies, and this starts a Game of Thrones, in the middle of this story going on about all these great and terrible families from here. It could be an enemy nation, like the Germans in World War II, they invade, or the Fire Nation, suddenly attacks, and everything in the world changes, and it all goes from here. You get the idea. Something bad happens in the world we know changes. And from here, we have our characters, our impact. They heed the call of adventure. They find Aang. Katara and Sokka find Aang, and they know, okay, we've got to step up. This is our moment to jump to action. Luke Skywalker, his family's attacked. Instead of being like, hey, great, I inherited the farm now. It's all mine. I'm going to go off and become the greatest moisture farmer on, the galaxy's ever known. From there, you have Aragon, how any of these stories that come from here, the superhero stories, the villain, the superhero movies all have this great, usually like 10-minute montage where something villainous usually happens, and this introduces the villain, and then we get to the main character, and then you're waiting to see when they're going to intersect, when the hero is going to interrupt and kind of come into clash with the villain. And, you might start off with smaller villains or like level 1 villains before you level up to level 10, 5 or 10 villain or whatever. But it goes to a climax. The great danger is the greatest. There's this clear, the hill we all saw in high school literature class. The fate of a nation is at stake. A pair of lovers, someone else, are they going to live happily ever after? And we're waiting to bated breath. Can the hero do it? And the hero does. And everything wraps up in a neat, tight bow. And everything's great. The lovers are beautiful. The heroes are heroic. The danger is real. And in the end, our guy or gal finds the love interest. The hero overcomes the danger. And everybody sees how great they are and happily ever after. This is an awesome story. People love it. Again, not saying anything is wrong with this, but I'm saying this is kind of the idea of what we expect from stories. This is the reason why people don't really like tragedies nowadays, because you want this. There is an idea of what you want to have. Now, if you agreed with any of that, just know that me and you, we're all part of the problem of how, this idea of how stories should go. And this is just how it goes. This is what we want. This is what we want for our own stories. So it's natural that this is what we want for the stories that we watch, because we want the fiction to be able to replicate that in our own non-fiction lives from here. And it's very important to people that the hero should win. This is what we want. This is what people want on a low level. Now, this is what makes The Hobbit such an amazing story, is because if you are paying attention or familiar with The Hobbit as a story, this is not exactly what happens. But despite all that, that's what we love about it, because it's not this. It's not the most boring, generic story ever. It really changes everything. It breaks the rules, and it does it so successfully. And this is what we're going to be kind of looking at and seeing. This is the reason why it's going to be so hard to adapt it and stay true to this ideal. And so for The Hobbit, we find our hero Bilbo Baggins. He's going about his day when Gandalf, the noisy and obtrusive wizard, or guy who sells firecrackers, stops by for a chat. Bilbo tells him to buzz off, basically, and he makes a mark on the door saying that's a thief for hire. And it just so happens there's a whole bunch of dwarves who are looking for a burglar to round out their party for, I think, a number 14 or 15 party members, in order to set off onto their journey to retake the Lonely Mountain from the evil dragon Smaug. And Bilbo's kind of pulled reluctantly into this call of adventure, and immediately, it's really funny, once they first set out, it's miserable. They lose the ponies with their food, they're wet, they can't start fires, like everything is completely miserable, and their journey has barely begun. And the dwarves have already, everyone's pissed at each other. And then suddenly they're like, oh, we see a fire up ahead. Bilbo, go explore. And Bilbo goes up and explores. And, it's trolls, not cave trolls, just regular trolls. And they nearly kidnap all the dwarves, bundle all of them up. And it's not until Gandalf suddenly comes back and appears and causes the trolls to argue with each other, and the sunlight comes and they're turned to stone, and they manage to get alive. It's like day one they launch out. I know it's not day one, but day one they launch out and immediately almost get completely party wiped, team wiped from here. They nearly all die and get eaten from here. And so then, they finally make it to Rivendell. They get a whole bunch of help, a whole bunch, more ponies, more supplies. They finally get everything like this. And they make it up to the Misty Mountains. There's storms, and they hide in this alcove, only to be attacked and kidnapped. Basically, again, almost kidnapped fully again by goblins and flee into the Underdark. They're trapped under the mountain, and they manage to escape and everything like that. And Gandalf manages to help them, but then Bilbo is separated. He's knocked loose from the dwarf who's carrying him, and he's separated, and he finds the ring and Gollum and escapes. The eagles come and save the dwarves outside from the trees and the goblins, and they meet Bjorn and head into Mirkwood, and then they head into Mirkwood. And from Mirkwood, Gandalf gives them rather strict instructions saying, whatever you do, please do not leave the path. And what do? They they almost immediately leave the path. They do not listen to Gandalf from here. And again, this is the thing that's kind of funny. The dwarves are not very heroic. They're not very moral. It's kind of a greed and a prideful thing. Obviously they want revenge against the dragon, but they're not really... They're normal people almost. Like, this is the thing. This is how normal people resolve. They're not perfect and heroic, and they don't live through altruistic means and morals. Again, they're kind of more regular people, and Gandalf is very much this outside figure who continually pops into the story from here. And Bilbo, despite everything, with the power of the ring, who's turns him invisible, that he he stole from the caves under the Misty Mountains. He's able to help the dwarves escape from Thranduil's palace hidden in Mirkwood, and they escape and make it to Lake Town, and the mayor reluctantly helps them, and then they leave, and there's times, whole times throughout this that they're arguing and bickering. Bilbo kind of wishes and threatens and says, I should have left you to rot in Thranduil's dungeons under Mirkwood. And they finally go, rah, rah, and they're fighting back and forth, and they go to the Lonely Mountain, and they get inside, and Bilbo steals a piece of treasure, and all the dwarves are like, oh, that's great, that's awesome, that's very, very clever. And then this causes Smaug to pop out and come and start attacking Lake Town and try and find it and kill his treasure. And then they lock him out, and he can't get back in. And then the Lonely, and it's a complete disaster. Like, you had a plan, and the plan immediately went downhill, because you realize up until this point that the dwarves don't actually have a really good plan or any plan. They don't even have a concept of a plan for how to kill Smaug. They don't really have anything. They're just kind of like, oh, we sneak up on him and axe him to death or something like that. Like, it's a terrible idea. It's a terrible plan. Granted, Smaug is evil and he needs to die, but at this point you can see the dwarves have no idea what they're doing. Nothing that they've done so far really has any indication that it's going to be working from here. And so what you have is a very, very interesting, this is something like never really happens. You have random pedestrian, Millicent bystander man who has an arrow and shoots it and kills Smaug. And it's just like this whole, granted, there's no buildup because Thorin's not exactly shown to be this great heroic hero or anything like that. Thorin doesn't get his moment to, 1v1 the dragon and avenge his father and kill him and anything from there. No, random guy, bard from Lake Town, kills Smaug. One shot, one cheap shot. Gets a crit, natural 20, and he kills him from there. And so it's like now this complete big question. This is the thing where you think about the plot to The Hobbit and you're like, wait, this isn't supposed to happen. This is not how it's supposed to go. But this is how it goes from here. And so now that Smaug is dead, everyone is now clamoring to figure out what to do with the treasure. The dwarves, Thorin and his company said the treasure is all ours. And Lake Town is like half in ruins, says, hey, we need a little bit of that treasure, or a lot of that treasure, because some of them are greedy and some of them are righteous from here. Thranduil comes out of Mirkwood, says, hey, we want a piece, they want a piece from here. The dwarves from the Iron Mountains show up. And then lastly, the goblins from the Misty Mountains come down and say, hey, we want our treasure. And it's basically up to Bilbo to do a bit of skullduggery to steal the Arkenstone from Thorin, from his best friend, from his good friend for all this, steal it in order to try to force and blackmail Thorin into actually cooperating and letting them fight against this, put down your enemies or anything like this. And it's one of the things, Thorin's not very heroic. A lot of the dwarves are not heroic. They're actually in it for themselves, kind of just like everyone else is from here. And then this comes to a head where, the Battle of the Five Armies come in, the Eagles show up from there, and it's all these different armies come to a head, and they're fighting and killing each other and murdering and da-da-da-da-da. Bunch of dwarves die, including Thorin, but he is actually able in his last moments able to make it up to Bilbo and stuff. And it's just like this, it's such a bizarre story because it's like, again, the hero of the story by all accounts is Gandalf and Bard. And then everybody else is kind of should be side characters. But instead you have random, Millicent Bystander guy who runs by with a black arrow, kills Smaug. And it's just this complete cluster of a story that you're not expecting to happen because this is not how we normally expect stories to go. You can imagine the plan only works. All of this only works is because Bard and Black Arrow and his Black Arrow from there. And so this is the problem any adaptation has to do, is where they're trying to square this. Now, the way The Hobbit gets around this is because if there's the law of good that comes. So anytime I tell you about a story that breaks the traditional mold, so long as they follow the law of good, you can get away with anything, from there. And for those of you not familiar, the law of good is if your story's good enough, you can get away with anything. That's basically simply put, that's it. So you can have a story where everyone's a coward, so long as it's good. Everyone's, in love with it from here. Scooby-Doo is the story about the two favorite characters from Scooby-Doo are Scooby and Shaggy, who are complete cowards. But it's good. It's good for different reasons. They're not heroic, but it's good because they're funny. And that's how the good from there. And it works from here. And so this is what you have with the plot of The Hobbit. Dwarves are as good guys who generally act kind of brave and heroic one moment, and then another, they're ungrateful and kind of nasty, and then they're kind of greedy hoarders at the end. They're realistic characters. They're full of this full range of complex emotions that you would expect from regular people. They're not one-dimensionally, heroic people or anything like that. And this plot is actually a lot more realistic than you would expect from a story with dragons and magic and goblins and magical rings and anything like that. And this is where the problem lies. And again, when I say problem, is not actually a problem. It just means that it doesn't jive or match with the typical, superhero. Imagine trying to tell a superhero where you have a coward who doesn't actually do anything heroic, and then some other random guy at the end ends up saving the day, and that's it from there. Iron Man, you could say, oh, well, he's not, maybe he's not just, all moral. He's a little bit cynical. He comes through at the end of the day. Like, he's just as heroic. Like, he's cynical and sassy about it all the whole way through, but he's still just as heroic. He's not going to let people die or anything. Like, he's not going to say screw you to everyone from there. And that's what you have. The hero of this story, you could say, okay, well, the hero's Bilbo. This is what happened. Bilbo gets knocked out, like, by a stray arrow at the height of the battle, and then he just misses the whole fight. He's just AFK unconscious completely for the rest of it. There's no heroic moments for him. Bard, the random badass in Lake Town, kills Smaug and has the cool moment. Not Thorin, not a dwarf, just a random guy we met. The Elven King and anything like that do most of the fighting. The dwarves, the Iron Mountain, and the elves do a lot of fighting for protecting the town and protecting the Lonely Mountain from the goblin hordes. But there's no one's trying to fit the brave, heroic, muscular man who saves the maiden, who romances, or anything like that. This is not what this story is about. And at the end, your moment, the souring memory of Thorin and a lot of the dwarves is that they're like really greedy and miserly. They're not exactly standing up to like Gimli's model of what a heroic dwarf should act like. And so what does this mean for any modern adaptation, especially for big budget movies that have to go through producers and modern sanitation and audience analysis? I don't think that they will ever let anyone actually tell the story as it's written. Because again, they'll do the most things that most people think is that they have to adapt a best-selling story, which is one of the best-selling stories of all time in all history. They want to fix it in order to jive with modern audiences a little bit better. They won't trust the audience to understand. And maybe the writers themselves don't understand. Maybe the producers don't understand it. That's likely. They want the widest possible audience, even if it's just this bare minimum of understanding of what happens in the plot, they're acceptable for that. It's this broad audience appreciation that they're after, where nobody loves it, but everyone kind of likes it from there. And this is what you want, because it's never anyways about the story. It's about this greater universe, the action figures or anything like that. And so this is what you have when producers and movie people of today, especially back then, 10 years, 15 years ago, when they were doing an adaptation of this story, is they're trying to take it and say, okay, it needs to be fixed. All right, what do we need? We need a love story. We need a love story between two different races, two races that hate each other. That seems to be a favorite. In the Rings of Power, that's what we have. We have Halbrand and Galadriel. We have this weird tension going on in season 1. You have the weird elf. I can't remember what his name, Weird Elf and that weird lady who he's been watching for the past 75 years. You know, he watched her grow up and now they're in a romance, which is kind of weird. But you know what? That's what they want. They want romance. They want strong female lead. You know, The Hobbit doesn't really have any female characters in the book. So, you know, they have to do that. You know, Thorin is not really heroic. So what do they have to do? They have to make an evil guy of evil badness. And that's the White Orc. And in order to do that, we have to give Thorin his heroic moment. He can't just die and kind of be a miserly person or anything like that. You can't have that. You have to have a hero. There must be a hero or else there is no story here. And that's what these people think. You know, there's a quest for vengeance in this final showdown because he can't kill Smaug. Obviously, they couldn't do that much of brutalizing the adaptation from theirs. But what do they have to do? You know, the writers don't feel like the audience can handle a main character like Thorin who banishes Bilbo, tries to hoard the treasure, and then doesn't even kill or even assist with killing Smaug and then dies. You know, from there. So they have to change it. They have to fix it. And they have to make 3 movies so they can milk the crap out of it because ching, ching, ching. We all know why exactly they did that. You know, just too much money. They just can't have enough of it. And this is the reason why we will never get a good adaptation of The Hobbit is because this big budget production, this big budget understanding of what a story should be and how everything must work. You can't have a story that's in The Hobbit. They won't trust the source material. They don't trust their audiences from here to understand it. They have to spoon feed them a genteel, you know, understandable story according to what they deem as necessary. Which is a shame because The Hobbit is an amazing story. The reason why it is so amazing is because it's fully Tolkien, it's fully in Middle-earth. You have all these characters at play, and the fact that makes it interesting and stand out is because you don't have these generic, you know, not generic, these heroic characters. You have different types of characters at play that really change everything. And that's what makes this story so unique. You know, that's what makes it almost magical feeling. You have these, you know, characters that are so memorable, but it's not because they're heroic, and that's okay. Not everyone has to be, you know, the Captain America, or not everyone has to slowly turn into Tony Stark with their quippy, snarky one-liners at every single moment. You know, we can't take anything serious. We always have to have the last word. You can have stories without it. You can have a story without a love story. You can have it without a strong female lead or a strong male lead. You know, Annihilation is the best example of having an all-female cast that just is a brilliant movie that works on so many levels from there. So I can hope that we will get an adaptation that does it justice at some time, but I don't believe it will be anytime soon, which is a shame because it's such a good story from there. So, but yeah, that's all I have. I am Jeff Cassidy. This is Fiction Applied, and I hope you learned something. Thanks for watching.